As many a great game has, Deltarune has had an underlying mystery around it, and that of course would be concerning the identity of the knight. Chapter 1 with the vague mentions of his existence, and now in Chapter 2 where we know more about the knight's cause. Still, yet we know very little about the true identity of it. Nary a clue is left, but among many the sentiment is shared that the knight is clearly Kris. Though to see this prevalent speculation makes me happy, the chosen candidate must waver my smile. I myself feel that Kris is not the knight, and I would love to share my senses. Without further ado, it has been made clear in the game that whoever the knight may be, it has been responsible for the creation of the dark fountains in the world adjacent to the main original fountain, starting with that of the Card Kingdom and the Chaos King, and now erupting with the Cyber World and Queen. The king had known the knight well and felt bound to bring about his will, while the queen was hardly aware of it or its true potential, seeking to overpower it and create her own dark fountains. So if Kris were the knight, then it would be necessary for him to have not only traveled into the dark world, but known how to create towers, all without the knowledge of Ralsei, the prophecy, or the existence of the dark world in general. The knight has been in the dark world for quite some time, as we understand his tight connections with Chaos King and understood the workings in order to create a tower. Kris, of course, could not have done this. Kris had no prior knowledge of the Dark World, going as far as to back away from the first Dark World fountain at the start of Chapter 1 outside of the player's control. Kris has only been able to do this in select instances, like when saving Susie's life in Chapter 1, or being unable to control their fear and anguish after Spam to Neo in Chapter 2. It is something reserved for incredible instances of feeling or will, and only small gestures. If Kris knew about the Dark World and was as familiar as the knight would need to be, why would he be scared and taken aback by the portal? The second portal is something we must question as well. We see at the start of Chapter 2 that Kris has used their freedom from the player to eat all the pie in the kitchen, rather than anything conspicuous. However, some people believe that this was a mere cover-up in order for Kris to hide their true identity from the player, and that while Kris was free, he opened the portal to the cyberworld. This seems unlikely in my eyes. Kris has shown a very restrained ability outside of the player's control, only able to shamble across the floor. The most we saw them do was in Chapter 2 when they opened up a dark fountain in their living room. As powerful as this seems, Kris immediately shambles back to the couch after this and easily could have been extremely tired out from this action. If Kris were to open up the cyberworld, he would have had to sneak out of his house, shamble all the way into town and to the library, break inside without a trace, open up a dark fountain, shamble home, and then eat an entire pie before being back in bed. If Kris was able to do all this in one night, then why would they need to be controlled anyway? Furthermore, how could no library staff have noticed this fountain in the computer lab as they came in for work? If somehow every employee didn't show up that particular day, then surely Birdley, who is very close to the library staff seeing as he works there, would notice the absence and question this. Furthermore, how would Noelle and Birdley have gone to the computer lab, had their books out, and began studying, all while the fountain warred feet away from them? You can see their books out on the table when you destroy the cyber fountain, and they seem to remember being in the process of the project before the fountain erupted. The fountain would have needed to be opened before Kris and Susie showed up and after Noelle and Birdley began working. So it doesn't even matter if Kris could have opened up the dark fountain, as chronologically it would have been impossible. How, you may ask, could the fountain have been opened up then? Well, there's a closet in the computer lab, notably having enough room to hold a person inside. My idea is that whoever the knight is had been hidden in there, waited for Birdley and Noelle to show up for their studies, and then opened the dark fountain. But hey, maybe Kris did it while they were literally sleeping through class. As previously stated, many characters in the game have already been known to know the knight, whether that be King, Jevil, or Queen and her minions. Chaos King adamantly preaches about the knight's righteousness in his battle. The other kings mention its acts of overthrowing them and putting Chaos King solely in charge. Jevil mentions the knight in passing, so we don't know if they're actually met or if he just knows it from some magical foresight. And the Queen met it as it created the world and now wants to match his power, her minions stating as such throughout the game. None of these characters seem to know Kris though, not even a passing comment on a similarity or feeling.
Wait, I know you.
You might say that Kris could have been in disguise, but you'd think someone would have mentioned feeling something similar in Kris compared to the knight. Especially someone as analytical and knowledgeable as the Queen should have noted something, anything that would match the two together. People cite Kris's appearances as a knight in the dark world as evidence to point towards their secret identity, but it hardly means anything. It's not as if Kris has a completely different interchangeable knight suit to put on while acting the knight. Kris isn't the only other knight anyway. To point them out as the main suspect because of their class makes little sense.
Oh look! Rudin has a sword! He must be the knight!
Either way, from Queen's description of the knight, we can infer that the knight used a knife to create the cyberworld fountain. People like to point this out as evidence for Kris's guiltiness, seeing as Kris uses a knife in the light world to supposedly open up a dark fountain at the end of chapter 2. Do you know how accessible knives are? Alright, I suppose it is time to address the elephant in the room. At the end of chapter 2, Kris opens up a dark fountain in the middle of their house. Reasonably, people see this as the defining truth that proves their theory that Kris is the knight. We see Kris open up a dark fountain right in front of us. This is irrefutable evidence of Kris's identity. Okay, there is plenty to unpack here. So, as I have gone over earlier, Kris could not have opened up the first 2 fountains. But now we see them opening up this third one, which almost gives validity to the idea that Kris has opened up the other 2. Assuming Kris is the knight, then we have to clear reason for why Kris would be opening up this fountain. However, why are we allowed to see it so broadly? To believe Kris is the knight, we must believe in the impossible hoops Kris must have jumped through to open up the cyberworld fountain. The reason for these precautions being to hide Kris's nature as the knight from the player. To also feel the need to make an alibi through the pie tin furthers this idea, if it is true. At the end of chapter 2, Kris just opens up a new fountain, disregarding the watchful eyes of the player. Why go through all the trouble the first time just to avoid it all the next day? Of course, I have already been over how Kris could not have opened up the second fountain, but it's important to entertain the idea. Why then did Kris make this fountain if not as the knight for some unknown plot? First off, there is the idea that Ralsei has encouraged Kris to make more dark fountains along with the knight to create more dark worlds and gather darkness for him to rule over. And ooh, I talked about it in this video, ooh, free plug, ooh. But basically, it can be disregarded for many reasons and doesn't make much sense. Another idea is that Kris is doing this independent of everyone else's wishes, other than their own. Maybe they want to go on more adventures with their friends, and they don't feel the knight is making enough of the dark worlds to satisfy their hunger. Well, the knight has been making these fountains on a daily basis anyway, so why must Kris make any more? Daily adventures that last all after school seem plenty for Kris and their friends. I myself have 2 main ideas as to what is happening. My first idea is that Kris is trying in some way to hurt the player or end the fun for you. By making these extra dark fountains with the knight, Kris is risking the incurring of the roaring, which was only fully realized in scope as of chapter 2 when Ralsei gave his speech. Before this, Kris was not completely in the know about the issues involved with the creation of more dark fountains, and as such would not have felt the same motivation. But now that Kris understands how to make dark fountains from Queen and Berdly's presentation, and knows what they can do, they have realized a plan. This explains why they didn't open up the first 2 fountains, but did this time. Kris could be thinking that by opening up these dark fountains, the player will eventually be unable to do much as the world begins to crumble. Mayhaps this isn't the exact thought process, but if Kris really is creating a dark fountain, then there is clearly a statement being made towards the player, or whoever they think is controlling them. Kris might not care about those you seem to, seen by talking to the likes of Sans, Noelle's dad, or Onion. Maybe Kris feels that by opening up a dark fountain and allowing it to engulf the town, they are putting those you care about in danger, and will make you stop playing to ensure their safety. Even as I write down this idea, I see the cracks forming, but it's still an idea that I'd like to get out there. Maybe someone will formulate it better, or be inspired to develop it further. Either way, I do believe Kris is trying to make some sort of statement towards their puppet master. My second idea is that the opening of this fountain is merely another fake-out by Toby Fox to have people speculating. This was the case in chapter 1 with the pie fake-out, so why could it not be the same again? Though this ending is more explicit than the first one, it could still be easily retconned by Toby if he decides to go another way with the story, or if he just wanted it to be a shock value. I must remind you, there's still a pie cooling in the oven, so Kris may have more fun while they are out of our control. This has been a pleasure making, but certainly one that I was required to partake in. Many comments on my last video pertaining to Ralsei had questioned my confidence in the differences of Kris and the Knight. I feel hopeful that this video has done well to explain my thoughts on the matter. Though I do not have all of the answers, I still feel I have enough for this to have been a credible essay for you lot. I don't know who could be the Knight in place of Kris. Perhaps we haven't met it yet. We shouldn't feel the need to focus on such broad inquiries yet, as we are still early on in the story of Deltarune as a whole, and we know very little. Maybe focus on the finer things in life, like Rule's card, Lancer, or Sign